Thanks for coming to Residency Unlimited. Today, we're going to talk about American Trickster, The Hidden Lives of Carlos Castaneda, written by Rue Marshall, who we have right here. Rue Marshall, everyone.
Hello.
This is, from what I understand, some of the people in the audience have already read the book. Can I have a show of hands so I know who I'm dealing with? Okay. Good, that's good. So we'll have a Q&A, and I'm sure you have as many questions as I do, which I have a lot. I don't know if we'll get to them all. No, I don't think we will. But it's a fascinating book. And as I told Rue, it took 20 years to write it, but I read it in 1 week. And that seems really perverse to me. It's just like, or maybe that's the right thing.
That shows that you going for.
You boiled that thing down, you know? And it's incredibly readable, legible, riveting, thrilling, chilling, frightening, and profound, actually, really, with questions about reality and perception, which is Carlos's forte, I guess. And then yours.
One of his fortes.
One of them.
One of his fortes.
So I'm going to read the introduction here, and then we'll get started, Jason. Okay, Rue Marshall. Oh, I'm David Dixon, by the way. I'll introduce myself. I'm an artist, filmmaker, and I had a gallery right down the street, Cat House proper, which Rue curated a show there, and that's how we met. Well, we met earlier, but that's how we became friendly, and have been in conversation about art and aesthetics ever since, and literature. So I'm excited to
Can I interrupt the introduction?
Sure.
Yeah, because just to say, that's also how I got connected with RU, because some of people came over to see that show, and and then I ended up being a visiting curator.
Here?
Yeah.
What did you curate here?
A show.
I didn't
of
see
art,
it.
an art show. Where were you? It was called what was it called? Metaphormosis something. Whatever. I'm not.
We're not talking about that.
Now.
Okay.
Back to the introduction.
Well, our show was called Facts of Light, that we did at Cat House proper, and it was a great experience. And Rue was one of the only. I only had one other guest curator, which I enjoyed, and then was going to do more, but then the gallery closed. Okay, but Rue Marshall is the author of American Trickster, The Hidden Lives of Carlos Castaneda, which was just released by Or Books. And some of the Publisher Weekly 4 or 5 star review. Some of the,
5. No, they just give it 1 star.
Just one?
Yeah, that's all the stars you can get.
And whatever the most is what we got. And the words were, quote unquote, this enthralls, right. Their novel, A Separate Reality, which is also back there, and we'll talk about it a little bit today too, was released by Carroll and Graf in 2006. 2006, which we just confirmed in the footnotes here, that's 2006 is exactly when Rue begins interviewing people for this book. So there's a real kind of transition there that we should talk about at some point. That's
We're
very
interested in
interesting.
transitions.
Yes. Yeah, lots of that.
Go on.
And that book was nominated for my glasses.
Lambda.
Okay.
Lambda Book Award.
Lambda Book Award. They are a recipient of the Hazel Rowley Prize from BIO, the Biographers International Organization, and they have twice been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Their work has appeared in Salon, N+1, the Evergreen Review, the Kenyan Review, the Barcelona Review, another Chicago magazine, Your Impossible Voice, and elsewhere. Their visual work has been exhibited at Participant Inc., Studio 10, Larry is in the house, Baxter Street, Cat House proper, that's my place, Art in General, White Columns, and numerous galleries in the United States and Europe. They served as visiting curator here at RU, as we just mentioned, in 2023. So let's begin this.
Thank you, David. And I remember the name of the show. It was called Metaphormosis.
Oh, that's a good
Pretty
one.
clever.
Very good.
And
Did you serve mimosas?
Shall I start?
That would have been good. You should talk to me next time.
I'm going to read, some of you have heard this before. We apologize, but just from the opening of the book.
I can see you've read it quite a bit. You've been busy.
You've
been very busy.
Down, boy. Please. It was early in the evening when Kevin saw the bones. He didn't stop at first. Exhausted, he needed to find a place to camp. His backpack weighed some 80 pounds. If he put it down, he'd have to pick it up again. Each year over President's Day, Kevin Barth and his friend Blaine Cowick went on an expedition. This was their 5th to Death Valley. We gravitated, Kevin would recall, toward places we wouldn't see anybody. That was our thrill. Blaine, we've both always been intrigued with the edge. I'm a seeker, so is Kevin. The Panamint Dunes lie near the valley's western edge. Kevin and Blaine could hardly have picked a spot more silent, still, remote. They'd started out the day before. Kevin, who taught biology at West Seattle High, had flown down to Oakland. Blaine picked him up at the airport in his 4-wheel drive. They then drove down to Bakersfield, where they stopped for Mexican food. After Bakersfield, the sun had set. For the next 5 hours, Blaine recalls, we drove slowly. We savored it. Both got stoned. They reached the town of Trona, turned onto the Trona Wild Rose Road. They passed the Naval Air Station, China Lake, from which into the R-2508 Special Use Airspace Complex, secret experimental weapons are launched, giving rise among locals to tales as strange as those that hover around Roswell. They entered the Death Valley National Park, found in the moonlight the turnoff for Lake Hill Road. Here, they decided, they'd camp for the night, above the Milky Way, an almost solid roof of stars. To the west, the Panamint Range, 11,000 feet, capped with snow. The next day, hungover, they started late around 2. They drove to the end of Lake Hill Road, then set off across a stretch of rocky alluvium, hiked for 4 hours. The rocks began giving way to the dunes. Soon, around them, all was completely white. The sun was going down behind the Panamints. They were looking for a place to pitch their tents. Then, Kevin recalls, I spotted the bones a good 30 meters away, far enough I didn't want to stop. They appeared small. A coyote, Kevin thought. He wanted to return later so he could bring some back to show his students. First, they had to find a place to camp. They trudged another half mile, found their spot, set up camp. Kevin, the way the moonlight lit the sand made it like a strange, filtered daylight. After smoking some more pot, they decided to walk back to where they'd seen the bones. With the darkness made visible, they could easily follow the tracks they'd made a few hours earlier. Then they saw them. Kevin, it was as if everything was on display against an alabaster backdrop. Now that he was close up, he knew the bones were too large for a coyote. A burro, Kevin guessed. Saw the jawbone, picked it up, showed it to Blaine. It has fillings, man, Blaine blurted out. Kevin dropped the bone. It's a child, he shouted. For a human, the jawbone seemed small. Kevin, we were like, fuck. He realized they might have come across a crime scene. They continued looking, found the spine. Several vertebrae were still attached to the tailbone. Kevin, I really wanted to find the skull, but the bones were scattered everywhere. I kicked up what looked like some sort of colorless fabric, a nylon mesh well buried in the sand. I tried getting a grip. I pulled. It looked like a duffel bag. I thought, maybe there's money in it. We were like the Hardy Boys. I kept pulling. Finally, it came out all at once. A whole chest cavity with some kind of disintegrated jacket. The sand poured out of it. It was now very late. They decided to go back to the campsite. Kevin, I'd no idea who it was, so I felt detached. He and Blaine speculated about the skeleton's identity. Neither could have dreamt that night or in any night for the next 15 years that the bones belonged to Nuri Alexander, the adopted daughter and lover of the writer whose work meant so much to both of them, the once world-famous anthropologist, Carlos Castaneda. There we go.
And thus begins.
And thus begins. Can I do just a check-in? How many people here knew who Carlos was before?
Oh wow! We can forget the first question.
Okay. Yeah, but we might do a little refresher.
A little brush up on who Carlos Castaneda is.
It's been a while.
Yeah. I have to confess I haven't read any of Carlos's writing, but I was aware of it a lot,
okay.
And people were talking about it even when I was young. But
Carlos rose to fame in 1968 with the publication by University of California Press of his first book, The Teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui way of knowledge that purported to tell of his apprenticeship with a Yaqui shaman, Don Juan, who using peyote, datura, and mushrooms initiates him into this way of knowledge that has never before been revealed to a Westerner. For at first it's kind of an underground bestseller, but pretty quickly becomes a mainstream bestseller. He's championed by the New York Times, Harper's, The Nation, what have you, everybody. For about 5 years, although there are always rumblings, but the validity of the work is not questioned publicly, with one exception we can go back to. And then this woman named Joyce Carol Oates writes a letter to the New York Times and goes, "Am I the only person who thinks that these are novels?" And that's the beginning of a very slow, and much slower than people in memory think, diminution of his status. There's never one moment where, like an Oprah James Fry kind of instance where he's defrocked, and there's still today people who are loyal to him, including University of California. But he's also got another project going on, which is he's got a cult, which remains very, very, very small, very secretive for about 30 years, and then in the 1990s. In part, probably because book sales are diminishing, but I think more importantly, his reputation is diminishing. They go public. They hold seminars all over the world. They teach something called tensegrity, which is they claim a technique passed down by 25 generations of Toltec shamans, which, unlike other kinds of exercise, if you do it impeccably, which people who have read Castaneda may remember, the word impeccable is used a lot, you might just be able to live forever. Carlos, however, although his followers are told he's going to turn into a ball of light and ascend into the heavens, develops liver cancer. And they keep that secret. And when he does die, 5 women who are among the closest people in the cult disappear, and then Nuri's body is found 5 years later.
And I was thinking, where's Carlos's body?
I believe it's in Death Valley, but nobody knows. He was cremated, in Culver City, but they did not want. Basically, just to, in the book, I'm very careful of how I say things. I'll be slightly less so tonight to, move it along. They wanted to start a new religion, and they wanted to create this mythology that these people had evanesced, that they had just disappeared. And but he was, I've got the death certificate. He was cremated. One of the women who would disappear was given the ashes. So. Okay. I think I know where they are, but
right. And this does continue today with the organization Evergreen.
It's still out there. If you want to take tensegrity classes, you can go online and do so.
And there's an organization.
There's a corporation called Clear Green, it's pretty. I have the sense. I used to follow everything they're doing. I don't anymore. It's kind of feels a little bit like it may be on its last legs in the United States, but it's kind of thriving more internationally. The whole tensegrity thing it's in the former Soviet Union, and Yeah, South
and they haven't
America.
been in touch with you yet, I guess. Or
The lawsuit has not appeared in my.
it hasn't.
Not yet, but could, you know. Any
Soon,
day,
let's hope. It's
any day.
good for business, I imagine. I mean, one thing I was realizing when preparing this and reading the book and then going back and looking at pages that I enjoyed and questions is that I think every page has a question or a good question. I mean, it's very dense and rich.
So we'll be here.
Yeah,
like,
considering
everybody
there's
free to
600 pages. So there's plenty to talk about. But maybe just as far as method goes, or how is it? I mean, you're an artist, and I know that because we've worked together, and I know Rue's work, and I know how to make artwork, and I can write a paragraph or two. But a biography is a whole different game, and I don't know if anyone goes to biography school.
No, they
Where
do
do you
now.
learn
They do
this?
now, but I didn't. You know, and
Right.
I don't think
but
I'm not
there's-
in favor of that.
It's not even journal. I mean, it's even
That's
beyond
like, I
journalism.
think that's the interesting thing about biography is nobody knows how to do it, you know,
Right.
and you know I think that's actually a good thing, you know, because any kind of approach, you know, can be brought to it. I certainly had no idea what I was doing, and certainly no idea of what kind of a project it was going to be. And going back to something you were asking me, you know, before, of, you know, just how did this start, was
Right.
because I had a novel on sale. Everything's on sale for great discount in the back, which is about, it's a queer new age crisis of faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Which
know,
I've
that
also read.
genre, which is always a big bestseller. And so, because I'm the only person in it, I think. And my agent said, could you do some kind of short nonfiction thing to help promote the book? And Castaneda's name had come up a lot when I was writing it, because I was using, you know, and this goes back to visual art and writing, a collage technique, where I would just put in different quotes. And the quotes from Castaneda were always the best. And I didn't, at the time, have any idea why that was. I do now, because basically he's plagiarizing everyone. But he's plagiarizing well. He's not a
good
slouch
curator.
plagiarizer. This is not just some AI, you know, schlock. He made everything really pithy and dramatic. So I immediately thought, whatever happened to Carlos Castaneda? That was in February 2006. I went online and I found this little article in the Pahrump Valley Times. You know, for art people, it's the home of the Brothel Museum. It's in Pahrump, Nevada. So that's its claim to fame. Yeah, it was about this discovery, and I was like, that is what? And then I found a memoir by a woman named Amy Wallace, and if any of you might remember the novelist Irving Wallace, she's his daughter, she was his daughter, and I called her, and we talked for 3 hours, and I was like, this is like the most unbelievable story. You know, so I kind of had to write about it, you know, and I don't know if I believe in the thing of, you know, a subject choosing you, you know, but maybe, you know, it certainly kind of felt like that. I imagine this would be like a 3-year project, or maybe a 5-year project. Mm-hmm. But every kind of wormhole or rabbit hole of Castaneda led into another one, and then into another one, and another one, and I had no idea of what, you know, which is kind of a good way, I think, to undertake any project, is to just have no idea of what you're getting into. Because if I'd known, I would not have been like, oh, I'm going to spend 20 years on this. But once you're deep into it, you're like, wow, I spent 5 years. So,
well, the fact that your other book, A Separate Reality, is named after a Castaneda book. How does, so it's more than 20 years in some way, you're already thinking
but I
about
wasn't
it.
doing anything, that had nothing to do with who he was, you know, that was because I had just ended up, you know, using, you know, a lot of quotes from the book, and it, you know, I had so, you know, they're very different kind of projects. I mean, what, you know, I think you might, you know, want to get at or be getting at with it, the connection would be, you know, on the personal level, is that Castaneda's books, they're about a search for perfection. And, you know, one of the many tricks in them is that perfection is just around the corner. And at least at the beginning, I think in the first book for sure, he's such a good writer that the reader identifies with that quest. And you're like, oh, you know, you just start to identify with this character, Carlos, who, one of the discoveries is that the character Carlos in the books has nothing at all to do with the real, you know, Castaneda, who he really was. But you're like, you're just about to get there. And, you know, after, you know, there end up being 10 books, you know, in all. At a certain point, you're like, oh, it's never going to happen.
Right.
But I think, you know, just more broadly speaking in terms of the culture, that's something, you know, that, you know, we don't like about Castaneda, is this inserting of the quest for, you know, perfectionism into, you know, the whole sort of the New Age discourse, and how it's the novel's about how that affected me as a, you know, a weird, non-binary, whatever, queer, you know, queer kid, and especially the thing of you're supposed to get rid of yourself, getting rid of the self. And, you know, which is a thing, you know, not obviously, but, you know, in Buddhism and in many kinds of traditions. But, you know, how that lands with people who are already being told that they should not, you know, be on this earth. Happy Gay Pride, everyone.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it's been a quest for you as well, writing the book from a separate reality of the first book to this book. I mean, you as an artist and as a thinker, I would say, you know, on par with Carlos or Fellini, who comes up.
It's a very different par. It's a very
Or
different
Fellini.
par.
I mean, we're artists ourselves. He was an artist.
Yes, Carlos went to art school.
Right.
And that's important in all of this.
It's important in the sense that there's this folding of art into life that I find really fascinating. And Carlos' attempt, what do they call it, breaching?
Breaching
You want to talk about Garfinkel and breaching?
I would love to talk about the breaching experiment.
Yeah, breaching experiments is like, you know, performance art that Carlos was kind of doing through these psychological experiments.
Carlos's mentor at UCLA was a guy named Harold Garfinkel, who, by some accounts, is one of the 10 most important sociologists of the 20th century. You know, by other accounts, he's just a big asshole. But you know, so I don't want to. But in some circles, he's held in very high regard. And you know, there was sort of an empire actually from like, you know, San Diego up to somewhere in mid-state California where Garfinkel ruled. And he's the founder of something called ethnomethodology, which is on the one hand, it's a very kind of microscopic examination of all of the techniques used by social scientists and all of the hidden assumptions that go into that, which is why a lot of social scientists didn't like him, because he's coming out of phenomenology. He's trying to ground sociology and all the social sciences in phenomenology, and basically say, you know, it's just an illusion that you have something called, you know, hard objective data. You know, subjectivity, the subjectivity of the observer always comes in. And if it's summed up in one sentence, it's reality is an agreed upon description. We make reality. We make you know, in some ways that seem kind of obvious now, because some of these things have really seeped into the culture, not just through Garfinkel, but broadly, which, you know, the nation state. You know, the United States exists because a whole lot of people agree that the United States exists. You know, money is real because people make it real. You know, Garfinkel is most known now for doing the first sociological study of a trans person named Agnes. And Agnes was, I mean, it's weird because he's not interested in personal liberation, doesn't give a shit about that, but he's interested in the way that Agnes demonstrates this, how we create reality. And he would do these experiments, and they're not really experiments, they're more like demonstrations, you know, and usually, you know, what do? You get students to do your experiments. And they would be things like sending them home for, you know, winter break, and with the instruction that they're supposed to act like boarders in their parents' home, and just by just changing their behavior a little bit, just causing total and complete disruption, and at least in his belief, showing how we make reality through talking. And my favorite one in the book...
And Carlos was one of these students that was...
Well, Carlos was his favorite student. Okay. Yeah, and Carlos did like coding. I mean, I'm pretty certain of this. I couldn't find the document, but he did... he took the data, and there's from one experiment that's going to, in particular, where the students are told it's a psych experiment, and that in this experiment, it's just going to be, you're just going to be given yes or no answers, right? And like there's some kind of curtain or whatever, and they think that they're learning something about psychology. The experimenters have been given a list of yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So they will say that to whatever the question is, doesn't matter. And what Garfinkel wanted to show, and I guess did show, is people will make meaning out of these completely arbitrary things. So did we answer this question here? I went off. So
no, not at all. That's the breaching. And then another one of these techniques that Carlos sort of developed through this ethnomethodology was mirroring as a psychological...
I wouldn't say that's an ethnomethodological thing. I think that's just kind of, something that, people who know how to seduce know how to do, but he did it
with Garfunkel, though, right?
Well, he did it with everyone, and that would be, if you met him, and if he had any interest in you at all, within 5 minutes, you would have this sense, because I just heard this from so many people, that this guy knew you so well. So there's some, arguably psychic component to this, which may just be being super, perceptive, but he would mirror back to you what you said, and, he would use Don Juan. He would be like, oh, Don Juan told me, he told me da-da-da, whatever it was that you had just said. So with Garfinkel, who is, he was a genius, I don't think that's really in question, he was like, oh, what you're teaching, this is the same thing Don Juan is telling me, in the desert. And what Carlos knew, and what I think I'm sure every cult leader knows this, is that people's emotions are always going to, as it were, trump their rational capacities. And it doesn't matter if you are, the smartest people at UCLA, or you're the New York Times, or you're the American reading public, or you are these women, in his cult who end up, committing suicide, to follow him into the next dimension. He uses exactly the same techniques, and he uses some of these techniques that were being used experimentally, at UCLA.
Right. So this kind of, I guess, a questioning of reality as something
what is real?
Definable is what opens the group to sort of cultic belief, because he's willing to, I guess, give answers to that question.
People want meaning. I want meaning. I think most people want meaning, and Carlos, provided that, that rather endlessly. There's another technique, maybe should be, it's called, at the UCLA, on UCLA it was called, students called it Garfinkeling, which would be just whatever somebody said, you'd just be like, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? It would drive people crazy, but that's like a cult. He used that as a cultic technique,
right.
Also.
And we're using this word cult pretty liberally in our conversation.
Sure.
And most of you probably know when I say, or we're talking about cults, what that is. But that was a major problem for you in publishing the book with the UC Press originally. You want to talk about the use of the word cult and what they call the
Absolutely.
cult
There's something that I didn't know about before I went into the great adventure of publishing this book, was something called the cult wars in academia. And on one side, there are the cult apologists, which basically they're people who believe that to call anything a cult is basically just to assault, attack, degrade a minority religion, And they argue that this has led to government overreach, which in some cases is probably true, and people being kidnapped in order to be deprogrammed, and so it's not like they're without a point, but it has become dogma, and this has been going on for 40, 50 years, and they control sociology of religion, they control what gets published. They testify. This is the reason Scientology has gotten away with so much of what it's gotten away is because these people testify. It's no different than your other mainstream religions. And then you just cross this campus to the psych department where there's people with a very, very different viewpoint. It's like, yes, cults are a thing. We in clinical psychology deal with people who are victims of it. It's very widespread and it has very defining characteristics as a social organization. And a couple key things. One is that this stuff about the beliefs doesn't matter. It can be save the dolphins, it can be libertarianism, it can be Marxism, whatever. What's really going on is a social organization or social formation which is all about the aggrandizement of a leader or sometimes a couple of leaders at the psychological expense of the followers, which is a devastating thing. So, and that's basically the definition I used in the book. But I went through hell because, and I don't spend too much time on University of California stuff, but I'd already been spending 2 years, the book had gone out for academic review. I'd been told to make some changes, which I made. I'd been told to cut my humongous book, to just being really, really big. And then I turned it back in, and my editor, not because of that, my editor quit. And I got bounced up to the big boss, and the old editor said, no problem, smooth sailing. It was anything other than smooth sailing. First anyway, whatever. It went to this sociologist of religion. I had to spend 6 months, rebutting this person, and then this was on the third round. It comes back, it's like, well, you're right about, you win on the cult issue, but now we want you to cut another 50,000 words from the book. And this was after 3 years, and we're still not gonna promise we're gonna publish the book. And we're still publishing, by the way, we're still publishing Castaneda and publishing it as, as cultural anthropology.
And Native American studies, right?
Well, that seems, that was what they were doing for, close to 50 years. They've now apparently taken that off.
Well, congratulations. Maybe you moved the needle a little bit.
Moved the needle a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, because there was very little, just to make that point, anything indigenous or Native American in what Carlos had written about.
Well, it has nothing at all, because it's presented as being,
Don
Yaqui, which, Yemi people. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. They don't use any of those drugs, to start with. He gets the flora wrong, he gets the fauna wrong, and the biggest thing though, and this is going back to what I was talking about before, about perfectionism, in all cultures, I won't say all, it's very big, but broadly speaking, shamanism, being a curandero, any of it, it's social. It's not about, one person who is going to become the page 2, I believe it's page 2 of the Teachings of Don Juan. It's in the opening pages. Carlos is identified as the chosen one. So it's all about being very, very exceptional. There's no kind of social fabric. And it just doesn't have anything to do with what really happens.
The chosen one makes me think of Star Wars. I want to talk about hoaxes and hexes, but...
Well, Star Wars is influenced by...
Yes, Star Wars is influenced by Don Juan.
Because you read the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
George Lucas was reading Tales of Power when he wrote the first screenplay for the first Star Wars film, and Obi-Wan Kenobi somehow or another derives from Don Juan.
Right.
Carlos is,
So it's kind of the hero's tale.
Yes.
So there is something of a hoax, one could say, about But I like, because around page 450, 350, which is one of my, when really I felt like things got
here we go.
cooking in an interest, really profound and almost frightening way. And you go pretty far with your friend Mark Fine, who you did a lot of interviews with, who had seemed to have experienced a hex. So there's maybe a distinction that is interesting to discuss, the difference between a hoax and a hex. And I think that hoax might be considering something, I don't know, secular, and a hex is something sort of magical.
Well, a hex might be real or might not be real. I have no position, on hexes. I, sometimes have, this, maybe need more vodka for this. There have definitely been some moments where I felt I might have been hexed in this.
Yes.
I don't, and my whole policy toward all of that is I don't rule anything in, I don't rule anything out. I interviewed, had long relationships with, like one woman's an important source who was, a UFO abductee, but what she told me checked out. By I mean checked out, it fit with, the year was correct. It fit with other narratives. And people who were, PhDs in anthropology were saying things that did not. That doesn't mean that I think she was abducted, but I just professionally have no position on that. I heard many, stories of, occult things happening to people, and yeah, maybe they do and maybe they don't. A hoax is something where you set out to, deceive people. Right. A more maybe interesting or different distinction is between a hoax and being a hoaxer and a trickster, right? Mm-hmm. One of the important things about a trickster, I think, is that it's ultimately revealed what the trick is. You find out what was done to you, and there's a lesson from it. Mm-hmm. Which I think at the end of the book, I'm like, he's a trickster, but he's also kind of not a trickster because he never leaves the stage, which is what's ultimately really scary about it. Mm-hmm. It's and going back to the art life thing, the performance of being Carlos Castaneda, not his original name. Yes. It's all this made up thing. There's no, and this is actually something that connects to the trans thing, because one of the things that Garfinkel wrote about Agnes is this, she comes up with the principle of no time out, that she's performing, in Garfinkel's view, she's performing, and this is well before Judith Butler. He comes up with his genders of performance. And Agnes is performing impeccably, and there's no time out for her. And there's no time out for Castaneda. Right. He doesn't, go home and, okay, yeah, we did that Brujo thing from, 9 to 9, and now we're good. No. Right.
And I guess at some point one wonders how much he knew he was hoaxing and how much he believed his own myth.
That's the interesting thing, I think, and I think it's the interesting thing about any of these people, because I think you have to make yourself believe, to be a real, liar. Really good. Well, you can be a liar. I lie. Everyone lies, but usually people lie for a specific reason, or there's a purpose to it. There's a very different thing when lying is your purpose. And I think Trump. It's because the parallels are. Yeah. Over the top. But it's this thing that you're not just trying to get something out of things. It's your art, it's your sport, it's central to your identity, and it has the function of basically breaking down people's capacity to make any kind of rational assessment of anything. And there's this ability to perform on the spot, to just come up with something no matter what. So, yeah.
And then writing a biography where you're trying to get to a truth or some facts. The names Crazy. In this book, it's very magical realism. It's very 100 Years of Solitude, where it's, when reading it, you can lose track of who's who because they changed their names 3 or 4 times. Carlos is renaming people.
Well, you should have seen it, but because this is a very because all of these people who are in the cult, at least 5 names. And it's really interesting because it does something. I've changed my name. It can be freeing on some level to change your name. But when you change your name all the time, there's a breakdown of your sense of who you are. It also made it impossible for their families to track them down, and it made it really, really hard to write about. And I think it's one of the reasons, you know, like even when this story about the discovery of Nuri and Nuri's skeleton in Death Valley happened, I think most, you know, people don't have time, you know, if you're a regular journalist, you know, to just, I mean, it took me, you know, like there's Nayi, there's Nuri, there's, you know, all these kind of names that sound very similar sometimes, and he would give the same person, would have the same name.
All based on Carlos, no?
Yes, and there's a lot. There's Carola. There's Carol. There are all these different. So yeah, the narcissism is
So you would get a new name and be sort of born into your Carlos Castaneda lifestyle and persona.
He would give you. You didn't get to pick your own name.
And he would match people, no?
Well, he would assign people to have sex with each other,
right?
Which is another. Actually, it's not an uncommon thing in cults, because it breaks people down,
and often with the person that they didn't like so much,
yes.
like their opposite, or the person they didn't.
Well, everybody would be given, you know, told, not get told they had an aura, you know, you're the green one. You're the red one. And it's very art school too. He's like matching, you know, complementary colors and stuff, you know, but it had, you know, a lot of it, because there's some very dramatic, terrible things that happen to people, but I was also trying to at least give some sense of the kind of sort of middle level terrible stuff, you know, that happens to people when they just lose, you know, they lose their, you know, their sense of self completely. Yeah.
There's a middle ground for that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a middle ground between like, you know, and I'm also being a little careful what I say, you know, for the recording or whatever. Well, there's a middle ground between killing yourself,
right?
You know, killing yourself and just like having your life spending, you know, 10, 20, 30 years, you know, in this pursuit of something magical that ends up to be, you know, nothing.
Right. There's we can just begin new tangents because there's so many. Do you want to
I get to pick a tangent?
Pick a tangent, the Fellini tangent, should we? Because this is just some good. And
well, that's because that ties into color, color theory.
Yeah, the color theory, because Fellini's green, just so you know. But was that your original research on that? How much did you have to find out about this Fellini thing?
I'll start with the story. But I'd heard bits and pieces of it. Fellini.
And just to keep in mind how this is art and reality, and now we have Fellini, one of the great...
Well, Fellini, I mean, one thing, you know, Fellini was Carlos's favorite director. That's been established. And Fellini was obsessed with Castaneda, because Fellini was very into the occult and into all of that. And he was tried, as many people did, to get in touch with find Castaneda, because he wanted to make a movie of the teachings of Don Juan. You know, no luck. Nobody knew, you know, where, you know, that guy, you know, where he lived, you know, changing his phone number all the time, you know, anyway.
No
Finally,
pictures.
You know, this has been going on for over a decade. You know, maybe anyway. I'm not going to come up with a number off the top of my head, but you know, 1984, all of a sudden, he gets access to Castaneda, and Castaneda's like, "Great, yes, you have to make a movie. Let's do it." You know, but you have to come to Los Angeles. You know, Fellini doesn't like to leave Rome. You know, he tries to get Castaneda to come over there, so he flies to LA. And it's like, oh my God, we're going to do it. It's going to be amazing. Fellini's brought his, you know, Italian entourage with him, and it's like we're going to go into the desert. We're going to find Don. You're going to meet Don Juan. Da, da, da. But then weird stuff starts happening. Fellini's walking through the Hilton lobby. There's a phone call, and it's like this is literally what it was, because there are multiple sources. You know, phone call from Mr. Fellini. You know, and he goes, "We are watching you. You must be very careful with Carlos Costa." You know, there's this like metallic, weird outer space voice. Then like messages, and you have the book on, Madame Blavatsky did this too.
Sure,
I don't know
Blavatsky.
if they do it. Messages drop from the ceiling, you know, and then Costa says, "Oh my God, the omens are terrible. We can't do it. We can't go. You know, the CIA is following me, but you can go." And he gives them, some directions, and Fellini and the Italians and one woman maybe was with them, or anyway, that's a whole other thing. And just weird, they go to Mexico and they go on this wild goose chase through Mexico. They end up in Cancun. They're assigned where they're assigned, which, wasn't quite what it is now. They're assigned colors. Each person is given a color.
By these phone calls?
I think that would be it. I'd have to check.
And they're looking
notes.
for Don Juan in this trip. Is that what
Yeah, and at a certain point, they don't even know because they're getting these messages telling them, you must go to, Mexicali, you must do this. But they get this thing like, you have to be back in Los Angeles tonight. You have to buy outfits in the colors that you've been assigned, and Fellini, not insignificantly, is green. It is not easy to find a green outfit at Sakowitz, but they come up with something. And you're also supposed to buy musical instruments. Only one of them knows how to play any musical instrument. Be in the hotel in Fellini's suite at midnight in your costumes, playing your instruments, which they do.
And Don Juan's supposed to appear or something? Or?
Well, you will find the message will arrive. The message will come. Things are kept vague.
But Fellini's going along with all this.
Well, he's totally, but he's not, unique in that. He's not.
Yeah, right.
It's just, these books were like, New York Times.
Right.
There was a lot giving credence to them. So they're in the hotel suite in their costumes, playing their music, making a horrible noise because they don't know what they're doing. Knock on the door. Oh my God, the message has come. And it's the management, like telling them to keep it down.
And is that the end of their journey then?
No, it goes on for 7 more years. That Fellini and this woman, Christina Engelhardt, who used to be Woody Allen's lover, Mariel Hemingway character is based on. She also worked for Jeffrey Epstein, but that's a side thing. But she has now been connected with Fellini. She goes to work for Fellini, and they're getting these up until his death. And he's totally freaked. He never knows what to make of it. It totally freaks him out. And my conclusion, and I think I'm right about this, is Castaneda admired Fellini. He also knew Fellini was a real artist, and that he at this point was not, and that was intolerable to him. And so there's this, it's a thing that goes throughout his career, and it's the same at UCLA, that he really admires he really admires Garfinkel. He wants his approval, but he also has to humiliate them. So
that's his dark, twisted side, because what an honor and privilege to make a film with Fellini. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that?
Well, the reason he didn't want to do it, I think, is because he was smart in that way of knowing that any representation would stand in the way of people's ability to project. I mean, I would let Fellini make the movie. Would stand in the way of people being able to imagine, and it goes back to mirroring, like whatever it was that they wanted. I don't know, how are we doing on the time here?
Oh, I don't know. I've still got a lot more questions. But maybe others have questions too. Well, is it time to open up already?
You go. Ask what you need to ask.
Yeah, because I feel like it's interesting in the sense that no one ever made the Don Juan film, not even Fellini, and he certainly would be a good choice, I guess, considering the spiritual, like Juliet of the Spirits and stuff. I mean, and then this idea that Carlos is a kind of pseudo artist kind of performance, doing this breaching exercise on humanity and his cult, but also us in reading the books. That's why I'm thinking it's a hoax, but if you read the books and you start to, I mean, you don't have to join the cult per se to start to buy into his vision of what reality is, and then it starts to distort, as in Mark in A Separate Reality, the other book you wrote, his reality begins to be distorted by this attempt at perfection, by trying to put into practice what Carlos is putting forward as a kind of philosophy. So, I mean, Carlos is a powerful character, a powerful thinker. One could think of a cult leader, if that's what he is, or a weaver of tales, or a philosopher who's appropriating or cribbing a lot of other cultural thought, but he's putting it together in a way that is convincing to people. And but no one ever, because if he is an artist of some sort, and he wrote you said there's a moment where someone mentions Jesus and the fact that Jesus didn't write his own story. You know, that Jesus was just Jesus and then the disciples told the story. And that's why Don Juan, it becomes, it's okay, kid, it's gonna be fine. That's why he uses Don Juan as a kind of as a foil.
That's hoaxing 101.
That's hoaxing 101.
Don't, I mean, don't say that the revelation came directly to me. You use an intermediary.
Right.
There, and it's like Madame Blavatsky, knew how to do that. It's much more effective if you got it from this wise person. Maybe preferably, I kind of hate this kind of language, but subaltern, status, somebody, maybe a little darker skinned, although Carlos is pretty dark skinned, somebody who's a magical, mystical other has given me this knowledge. And there's a whole, pattern of that. But I mean, I'd say, to hoax, people are like, oh, he's just a hoaxer. Yes, but he's not just.
Yeah.
He's more, and that's why and if it's simply just a story simply of a con man, it wouldn't have been that interesting.
Well, it's not, exactly. But and then you're part of the storytelling that Carlos in some way is using.
Carlos is using me
in the way that you're telling Carlos's story that he never could because he was always close. Maybe. And you're taking his mask like way off. I mean, I think you're. I don't know how pleased you would be.
I'm actually not averse to that. I wouldn't ever say that, because I did stick with things that there's evidence for in the book. And a lot of people oh, you hate Castaneda. I don't hate Castaneda. I think it's like a natural phenomena, and it would not be interesting to just be like, oh, he's evil or he's, whatever. I want to understand what lay beneath that, and I would certainly not have time to get into it, but I go, deep into his childhood and deep into, his trauma, and, there are things I think he could never say. And certainly once he had taken a certain path, and published the first book, he would have totally destroyed all of the attention he was getting if he had ever told the truth. But I think the truth comes out in a very coded way in the books. So, is there...
And in your book, too, he's a master trickster in some way, and artists are always claiming, this is why I brought my Lewis Hyde, tricksters make the world. And there's a kind of general, and Hermes, too, is somebody a character that I've always been interested in, about the trickster. We like to use this word a lot, and it's kind of playful, and usually, they talk about how they can do evil, but it always becomes kind of secondary to this sort of admiration that one has for their cleverness.
They reveal something about society.
Right.
That's what, or it's like, I don't even know quite what I have to say about this, but I think somebody like Warhol is an interesting, figure in this, but, not, he didn't send people off to go kill themselves to go to another dimension. But I think, Carlos definitely, it is kind of an art project. It's a massive art project, because he did try to make art, even in the 1950s, but it wasn't that great when it was object making, but performance.
Right.
I think maybe we should
Yes.
I feel we've talked a lot.
No, well then, I just want to finish it then with if Fellini couldn't make the film about the Don Juan, someone could make the film about this biography, which would be better. Because it could include the Don Juan. So do you have is anybody talking to you about this yet?
I have advice to give. If you ever write a book and somebody who happens to live in the 902 whatever Hollywood zip code gets in touch with you and says they want to make a movie of your book, hang the fuck up. Because these people are a fucking nightmare. I mean, people have been approaching me for years. You know, I mean, the art world is bad, but these people, like, oh my God, the level of like lying and bullshittery and time wasting, and of course, especially working on something, you know, no one is paying any attention. I don't have anyone to talk to about it. Somebody's, you know, it's very, you know, it's very tempting. And yes, somebody may still, you know, do something with this, and you know, I hope it would be a good thing. At this point, I'm just like, I don't want to talk. Just give me the money, and we'll be
well, that's
we'll
what
be
they'll
done.
do.
Because what they'll try to do is they're tricky. You know, get all the information from. They try to steal the stuff from you.
Right.
You know.
Right.
But get the contract. You know, get the contract. Get the money. Thank you,
but there's one more.
everybody.
No, there's one more thing that I want to mention just about the writing style, because the writing style is Rue, and you'll hear Rue's voice in the writing as well as in Separate Reality, the other book, and so you never lose that. And there's this somebody, one of the critics who read the book and wrote about it, used this term lapidary compression to describe your writing style, because and it seems to pick up, and at least from I started to notice it after 350, where you start to get into the inner workings of the cult group, and all the names are changing, and there's this, like, it's kind of confusing, and there's all this stuff going on and all these stories and people that you've been talking to, and you're trying to give us all this information fast because we're trying to get a lot packed in, and people are telling you to edit the book down.
That's, you know, that's how the lapidary compression basically came about.
Yeah.
Was because, you know, this was like the one thing people in publishing care about. They don't care about, you know, if it's true or if it's well written or you know, word count. You know, so I literally cut like 10,000 words by doing things like, okay, do we really need the verb to be in this sentence? No. You know, and you know, my rule is, does it make sense? You know, I mean, is it grammatically coherent, and will the reader know what I'm saying? And there's a lot you can get rid of that way, and people, yeah.
You definitely took spell check off your computer when you were writing, because it would have drove me nuts. Everything would have been underlined. There's no subject.
I broke spell because it's tricky, because you have to go back between. There's a lot of Spanish in it too.
Right.
And yeah, it's just that kind of made spell check not
Yeah, I mean, we
helpful.
could find passages, but that are really just it's respectful. I feel like to the reader, you can really. It's almost like you're busting us through a lot of information with these kind of clipped sentences, but never losing like the emotional sort of track along the way. It's really exciting to read for that, and very stylistic. Yeah. And
Thank you so much.
And witty and cute, just like
They're
you.
like you, witty and cute. And we have wine.